Before we begin, I would like to make clear that the bulk of today's argument comes from a thesis by Jason Rose called Emotion and Rhetoric in Bioshock, which is linked in the description. Go check it out, it's a really good read. Now then, Nightmare Night, or Halloween, comes for once a year, and like so many of my fellow analysts, I have undertaken to create a special episode dedicated to this frightening day, albeit belatedly. My question today is a rather curious one indeed. Recently, a book has been published called The Wisdom of Psychopaths, which purports to show what us emotion-feeling people can learn from those who feel nothing. This got me wondering, if psychopaths are truly more wise, would pony villains be more wise and successful in thwarting harmony if they were not prey to their emotions? My answer may surprise you. Dr. Kevin Dutton, the author of the aforementioned book, is a research psychologist at the University of Oxford, so needless to say he speaks with a certain degree of authority larger than my own. His arguments can be summarised as follows. Psychopaths are not swayed by emotions when making rational decisions, and thus are more prone to be fair on the one hand and correct on the other, as desires, fears, etc. can warp a person's judgment. The examples he gives of successful psychopaths in practice include careful surgeons, whose lack of concern for their patients allows them a calm, methodical approach in moments which would be unbearably tense for emotion-feeling doctors. However, Dutton also argues for a degree of scale of psychopathy, and this is what I would like to pick up on later. For our purposes, we shall use the Princess of the Night herself, given the occasion, as the basis for our inquiry. Would Nightmare Moon have succeeded if she had no emotions? Right off the bat, we could instantly reject the suggestion by pointing to her origin.
As time went on, the younger sister became resentful. The ponies relished and played in the day her elder sister brought forth, but shunned and slept through her beautiful night. One fateful day, the younger unicorn refused to lower the moon to make way for the dawn. The elder sister tried to reason with her, but the bitterness in the young one's heart had transformed her into a wicked mare of darkness, Nightmare Moon.
The bitterness that led to her transformation would be replaced by indifference were she psychopathic. However, this answer is lazy. Psychopaths have been known to be ambitious, with surveys demonstrating that there is a larger percentage of psychopaths in big business than in the general public. A more sophisticated answer is needed then. To begin, let us consider the advantages of Nightmare Moon's psychopathy. She would be fearless, so would not hesitate when Twilight first uses the elements. Furthermore, she would be less prone to arrogance, and simply efficiently kill her enemies rather than toy with them. Certainly, this Nightmare Moon is starting to sound like much more of a threat, and for a cursory inquiry, this is what our conclusion would be, that psychopathy would be better for her. Philosophical inquiry is about pushing concepts and arguments to their limits, and thus, we have to go deeper. To this end, we will turn to a different psychologist, Antonio Damasio. In philosophy and in society, there has always been a contrast between emotion and reason, ever since the time of Plato. The argument, which Dutton echoes in his defense of psychopathy, is that emotion works against reason, and vice versa, that emotions must be put to one side when rationality is involved, and the extent to which emotion remains is the extent to which the rationality is flawed. However, to put it simply, this is not true. Damasio researched psychology, and was particularly interested in how emotions factored into the working of the brain. By studying closely the anatomy of the brain, he created a new interpretation of brain activity. The brain core is the basic area of the brain which deals with emotions, wants, and needs, while the neocortex is responsible for more rigorous and methodical thought, such as involved in business. Traditionally, the former was considered unimportant due to the prejudice against emotion I mentioned previously, while the latter was thought to be responsible for all higher processes by itself. Damasio's great discovery was that this view is wrong. The neocortex does not handle higher rational functions alone. Instead, it and the brain core work together. He writes, "Nature appears to have built the apparatus of the rationality, not just on top of the apparatus of biological regulation, but also from it and with it. The neocortex becomes engaged along with the older brain core, and rationality results from their concerted activity." In other words, far from reason needing to get away from emotion, emotion is a necessary component of reason, as the brain core is involved in rational processes at a fundamental level. Why is this important, you may be wondering? If we can prove that emotion is necessary in reasoning, then we also show that psychopaths cannot be wise, as they lack the emotions necessary for proper rationality. Thus, Nightmare Moon's anger and sorrow will be vindicated. So far, I may have not convinced you, likely due to the lack of practical evidence. Fortunately, Damasio recorded extensive case studies to support his view. One such case, which demonstrates the importance of emotion and reason, is that of Elliot. Elliot was the victim of brain tumour, which induced brain damage into him. His knowledge, memories, and normal functions seemed to have remained intact, but Damasio's experiments showed his emotions had been cut off. He showed Elliot various emotional stimuli, such as houses burning, people injured in gory accidents, or about to drown in floods. Damasio writes, "As we debriefed Elliot from one of the many sessions of viewing these images, he told me, without equivocation, that his own feelings had changed from before his illness. He could sense how topics that had once evoked a strong emotion no longer caused any reaction, positive or negative. The only thing the brain damage had affected was his emotions. However, after it had occurred, Elliot was continually fired from any and all jobs. He divorced and drove away friends and family. Damasio reasoned that it was his lack of emotions that led to his downfall, due to it impairing his rational decision-making. To understand why, we must look at the frame problem in artificial intelligence. The frame problem can be summarized as the issue of how any given agent determines relevance. To illustrate this, Merrill and Cogburn give the example of a robot programmed to retrieve a battery from a trailer in a room. The trailer also has a bomb in it, which the robots are programmed to avoid bringing with them. When they are set going, however, they are unable to complete this mission. Sometimes they bring the bomb with the battery, sometimes they leave both in the room, and other times they freeze up from all the possible calculations. The problem is that when mutually exclusive paths are open to them, they do not have any way of deciding one way from the other. Merrill and Cogburn suggest that Damasio's discoveries show how humans avoid the frame problem. This is demonstrated by his theory of somatic markers, which resulted from his study. They describe a somatic marker as follows: a neurophysiological response that, through learning, comes to be associated with a given mental representation. These responses lead to the visceral experience of an emotion, an emotional qualia. When a human is faced with a rather large and unmanageable list, the emotions play a central role in making the list smaller and more manageable. Negative emotional qualia may eliminate some options from the list, for example, while positive emotional qualia may bookmark other options as desirable. These visceral responses help edit the vast list of possible choices. In other words, the reason emotion and the brain core are so crucial in reasoning is because they allow for somatic markers which reduce the infinite possible calculations to a smaller list of relevant calculations, whereupon the neocortex and reason can take over. Without the somatic markers, the neocortex would simply run every possible calculation and would be unable to make decisions when necessary, as demonstrated by Elliot's fall. Now we can return to the cursory judgment of Nightmare Moon's psychopathy, where it was decided it would aid her. With the benefit of somatic marker theory and the frame problem, we can see that emotions are actually a foundational necessity for rationality, rather than an obstruction, and thus Nightmare Moon is better off angry than indifferent, which is to say, she would not be more wise or successful were she a psychopath. To conclude, I will return to my previous mention of Dutton's scale of psychopathy. The range he gives is of emotional detachment, from full to none, psychopath to beyond even empath. The closer one is to the psychopathy end, the more rational one would be. Here is where I would agree with him. Psychopathic traits would help in lessening unwarranted emotional influence, such as favoritism to friends. This means that not all somatic markers are helpful. However, I would not go so far as to say that pure psychopaths would be the most rational, as they would lose their ability to create somatic markers, and so gauge relevance. Rather, someone who is around the halfway point between pure psychopathy and pure emotion would be the ideal, as they would have enough somatic markers to gauge relevance without being overcome by unwarranted emotional influence. This is where I would place Nightmare Moon on the scale, and thus the wisest, most successful Nightmare Moon is the Nightmare Moon that we got. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed yourself and maybe learned something too. What are your thoughts? Is Damasio correct and emotion necessary? Or would the Dutton-approved psychopathic Nightmare Moon seem wiser to you? Let me know in the comments. Until next time then, this is Nightsphere the Gnostic. Goodbye.
scene. She has been stuck on the move, but that's no reason to fret. She's not a nightmare no more, so buckle down and get set. She's coming gracing the subject, she ain't leaving no choice. She's gonna blow you all back with her equestrian voice. So cover all of your fears and stow away all your fright. The Lunar Princess is back to bring the nightmares tonight.